It was close to midnight when I found myself driving down a long, desolate stretch of road. The kind of road that made you question whether you were still on the right path. I had been driving for hours, the low hum of the engine the only sound in the otherwise silent night. My headlights cut through the darkness, but beyond that, there was nothing, just the endless black of the sky and the faint outline of trees on either side of me. I hadn't passed another car in at least 40 minutes. The GPS on my phone had lost signal long ago, leaving me to rely on my memory of the route. It was supposed to be a shortcut and old back road that would save me time on my way home. Now, though, I regretted taking it. The further I drove, the more isolated I felt, and a knot of unease began to tighten in my chest. The night had a strange weight to it, like the darkness was pressing in on me, suffocating. I told myself it was just the fatigue setting in. That's all it was. I rubbed my eyes, fighting to stay focused. I still had miles to go before I reached any sign of civilization. The road was narrow, the trees on either side seeming to close in the further I went. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, though I couldn't quite say why. Every time I glanced back, the road behind me was empty. But that didn't stop the growing feeling that I wasn't alone out here. It was irrational, I knew that, but it was there, gnawing at the back of my mind. I turned up the radio, hoping some music would distract me. The static hissed, no station available in this dead zone, so I turned it off, leaving me alone with the sound of the tires crunching over the cracked asphalt. My thoughts drifted, and the rhythmic pattern of the road almost lulled me into a daze. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I slammed on the brakes, my heart lurching as the car skidded to a stop. The headlights illuminated something on the side of the road, a figure, hunched and barely visible in the low light. I squinted, my pulse quickening as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like someone was standing there, just outside the reach of my headlights, their back to me. For a moment, I sat frozen, my fingers gripping the steering wheel. My first thought was that it might be someone in trouble. Maybe a hitchhiker or someone whose car had broken down. But as I stared at the figure, something about it felt wrong. It wasn't moving. It just stood there, and naturally still. I rolled down my window, hesitating for a moment before calling out. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" No response. The figure remained motionless, and a chill ran down my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, an instinctual warning that I should just drive away. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to at least check. I couldn't leave someone stranded out here. I fumbled for the flashlight in the glove compartment, the beam cutting through the darkness as I stepped out of the car. The night air was colder than I expected, a biting chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I walked slowly toward the figure, my footsteps crunching on the gravel. With each step, the knot in my stomach tightened out as I got closer. I realized something was off. The figure wasn't standing. It was hunched over, its head bent at an unnatural angle. My heart began to race. The flashlight's beam trembled in my hand as I shone it directly on the figure. It wasn't a person. It was a mannequin. I stood there, staring in disbelief. The thing was life-sized, dressed in ragged clothes, its face eerily blank. It had been propped up on the side of the road like some kind of sick joke. Who the hell would leave this out here? My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, my instincts screaming at me to get back in the car. But just as I turned, I heard a sound soft, almost like a low growl coming from the trees. I whipped around, the flashlight beam sweeping across the dark underbrush. There was nothing, just the wind rustling through the branches. But the growl persisted, growing louder, closer. Suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the trees, something large, something fast. My stomach twisted into knots, and I stumbled back toward the car. Whatever it was watching me. I could feel it. I jumped into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life. Without a second thought, I floored the gas pedal, the car lurching forward as I sped down the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the mannequin fading into the distance. But what I saw instead made my blood run cold. There was a figure running after me. At first, I thought it might be another trick of the light, maybe my tired mind playing tricks on me. But no, it was real. A tall, shadowy figure, barely visible in the dim light, was sprinting toward my car, moving impossibly fast. Faster than any human could. I pressed the accelerator harder, my heart hammering in my chest. The car surged forward, but the figure was keeping pace, its movements unnaturally smooth and fluid. I could see it more clearly now, its long limbs, its hunched posture, and something about the way it moved sent waves of terror through me. It wasn't human. The road twisted and turned, and I swerved around the bends, trying to lose it. But every time I glanced in the mirror, it was still there, closer now. My breath came in shallow gasps, my mind racing. What the hell was this thing? Up ahead, I saw a narrow turnoff leading into the trees. Without thinking, I veered onto the dirt path, my tires skidding as I tore through the forest. The branches scraped against the sides of the car, and I could feel the rough terrain jostling me in my seat. I had no idea where this path led, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. The figure disappeared from my view, swallowed by the trees, but I didn't slow down. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The narrow road twisted and turned, and I fought to keep control of the car as it bounced over the uneven ground. Just as I thought I might be safe, something slammed into the side of the car with a force that nearly sent me off the road. I screamed, jerking the wheel to regain control. My headlights caught a glimpse of something long, spindly limbs and glowing eyes, but it vanished just as quickly. I kept driving, refusing to stop, refusing to look back. After what felt like hours, the dirt path opened up into a small clearing. I skidded to a stop, breathing heavily, my hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The forest was silent now. No growls, no movement, just the sound of my ragged breathing and the faint rustling of the leaves. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe it was over, that whatever had chased me was gone. But then, as I sat there in the stillness, I noticed something strange. The trees surrounding the clearing were all lined with mannequins. Dozens of them, propped up against the trunks like grotesque sentinels. Their blank faces stared out into the darkness. UNMOVING. My stomach churned with a sickening realization. Before I could react, the car shook violently, the sound of something slamming into the roof reverberating through the cabin. I screamed, my entire body going cold as I looked up, expecting to see the shadowy figure peering through the windshield. But there was nothing. Just the sound of something moving above me, scraping against the metal roof. I threw the car into reverse, my tires spinning as I backed out of the clearing, desperate to get away from whatever was out there. The car lurched, and I floored the gas pedal, careening back down the dirt path, branches whipping against the windows. As I tore through the forest, my heart racing. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The mannequins were gone, and in their place, standing at the edge of the trees, was the figure, its glowing eyes watching me, and blinking as I disappeared into the night. I didn't stop driving until I reached the highway. I didn't stop until I saw the familiar glow of streetlights and the comforting presence of other cars on the road. Only then did I pull over, my hands still shaking as I tried to catch my breath. I never told anyone what happened that night. I'm not even sure I believe it myself. But every time I drive down a lonely stretch of road, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure, still chasing me, still watching. And I know, deep down, that it's still out there, waiting. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving a blanket of darkness over the winding country roads. I was driving home after visiting a friend, and the highway was desolate, a thin ribbon of asphalt surrounded by thick woods. The headlights of my car illuminated a small patch ahead, casting long shadows that danced ominously along the edges of the road. It had been a long day, and I felt fatigue tugging at my eyelids. I rolled the windows down, letting the cool night air whip through the car and wake me up. The trees loomed taller and closer as I navigated the turns, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I turned on the radio, hoping the familiar chatter of the DJ would ease my tension. The static crackled through the speakers, but I quickly tuned into a station broadcasting ghost stories, perfect for a night like this. The stories were compelling enough to hold my attention, but my mind kept wandering. I thought about how quiet the world felt at that moment, and how rare it was to drive through such remote areas. Suddenly, the DJ's voice turned serious, and he recounted a tale about a phantom hitchhiker who appeared out of nowhere on dark roads. They say she lures drivers to stop, only to vanish before their eyes, leaving a chill in the air. A shiver raced down my spine, but I laughed it off. I was almost home, and I wouldn't let a ghost story scare me. Just as I began to feel a little more at ease, I spotted something in the distance. A flicker of light in the trees caught my eye. My heart raced as I squinted to see better, and sure if I had imagined it, I turned off the radio and slowed down, peering into the darkness. The light flickered again, and my curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over to the side of the road and turned off my headlights, enveloped in darkness. Straining my eyes, I realized the light was coming from further down a dirt path that veered off from the main road. I glanced around. It felt like the world was holding its breath. It was just me, the road, and the eerie flickering light. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. I stepped out of the car, the chill of the night air hitting my skin. The sounds of the forest were amplified, the rustling leaves, distant hoots of owls, and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I followed the dirt path, the flickering light growing brighter as I approached. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I was focused on the source of the light. It led me to a small clearing where a fire crackled and danced in the dark. To my surprise, there was an old wooden chair sitting by the fire, and next to it, a weathered box. My curiosity piqued. Who would have a fire out here, so deep in the woods? I stepped closer, and as I did, I could feel the warmth of the flames on my face. I crouched next to the fire, intrigued by the box. It was battered and old, with strange symbols carved into its surface. I reached out to touch it, but something in my gut told me to stop. Just then, I heard a noise behind me. A soft rustling, like footsteps in the leaves. I spun around, my heart racing, but the clearing was empty. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No response. I stood frozen, eyes scanning the darkness. I could hear my breath quickening, panic rising in my chest. As I turned back toward the fire, I gasped. The flames flickered higher, casting shadows that danced around me. I blinked, and suddenly, standing in front of the fire was a figure. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered white dress that seemed to glow in the firelight. Her hair was long and tangled, and her eyes, wide and empty, stared directly at me. "Help me," she whispered, her voice chillingly soft. I took a step back, stumbling over my feet as the figure reached out toward me. The warmth of the fire turned ice cold, and dread washed over me. I wanted to run, to escape this nightmare, but my legs felt heavy. "Help me," she repeated, her voice echoing in the stillness. Suddenly, the figure lunged forward, and instinct kicked in. I turned and sprinted back down the path, heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline surging through my veins. I could hear her footsteps behind me, the sound growing louder as I ran, the flickering firelight fading into darkness. I burst through the tree line and dashed toward my car, fumbling with the keys. As I reached the driver's side, I jumped inside and slammed the door shut, locking it with shaky hands. I started the engine, the sound roaring to life as I threw the car into reverse, backing out onto the road. I glanced into my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman standing there, but the darkness was empty. My heart raced as I drove away from that cursed spot, the headlights illuminating the road ahead. I tried to calm myself, but the image of that ghostly figure haunted me, her eyes pleading and desperate. Just as I thought I was safe, my phone buzzed again, startling me. I picked it up, shaking hands, scrolling through the notifications. Among them was a missed call from my friend, followed by a text, "Did you see the news? Some girl went missing in the woods last month. They think she was out there all alone." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I read the text. My mind raced back to the woman by the fire. Had she been searching for help all this time? My hands trembled as I looked at the road ahead, the woods pressing in on both sides. I felt the weight of the darkness around me, the fear gripping my chest. Suddenly, a figure darted out from the trees, right in front of my car. I slammed on the brakes, heart leaping into my throat. The figure was a man, wild-eyed and disheveled, waving his arms frantically as if to signal for me to stop. My instinct screamed at me to drive away, but I felt paralyzed by the situation. The man rushed to my window, breathless and wide-eyed. "Please help me. I need to get out of here." I could barely comprehend what was happening. The flickering lights, the ghostly figure, the missed call. The fear twisted in my gut, and I knew I had to escape. "I can't help you," I said, my voice trembling. "I need to go. Please, you don't understand. It's not safe out here," he pleaded, eyes darting around as if he were being hunted. I shook my head, my foot hovering over the gas pedal. "I'm sorry, I can't." In that moment, the man's expression shifted, something dark flickering behind his eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, a smile creeping onto his face that made my skin crawl. Without thinking, I pressed the accelerator, my tires squealing as I sped away from him. I didn't look back, but I could feel his eyes on me, watching as I disappeared into the night. As I drove away, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. I was escaping whatever nightmare had gripped me. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time, my blood ran cold. The figure was no longer there. Instead, I saw the woman from the clearing, standing in the middle of the road, her expression unreadable. The last thing I remember before the darkness swallowed me was her whisper echoing in my mind, "You should have helped me." When I finally awoke, it was dawn. I was back on the main road, my car parked safely in the lot of a gas station. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm glow over the landscape. I looked around, disoriented, unsure of how I had gotten there. My heart was still racing, but I felt a strange sense of peace. As I stepped out of the car, I noticed something on the passenger seat, a small object. I picked it up, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a single, delicate hairpin, glinting in the sunlight. I recognized it from the woman in the woods. I looked around, the gas station empty except for a lone attendant at the counter. As I approached, I could hear him mumbling to himself, staring blankly ahead. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "Do you know anything about the woods nearby?" He turned to me slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Don't go out there," he warned, his voice low and gravelly. "It's not safe." And in that moment, I know I would never truly escape what I had encountered that night. The hairpin felt like a tether, pulling me back to a world I couldn't comprehend. As I drove away from that gas station, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The woman's face lingered in my mind, her eyes filled with sorrow. I wondered how many others had encountered her, how many had ignored her plea for help. But deep down, I knew she would never stop searching, and now she would always be a part of me. It was a cool autumn evening when I decided to take a late-night drive. I had spent the day with friends, celebrating the end of a long week, and I felt the urge to clear my head before heading home. The roads were quiet, illuminated only by the occasional streetlight flickering like an old film reel. I rolled the windows down to let the fresh air wash over me, and the scent of fallen leaves filled the car. I took a winding road that snaked through the woods, enjoying the peacefulness of the isolation. I loved driving at night. There was something calming about the way the world became hushed and still. But as I drove deeper into the woods, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. I shook it off, attributing it to the remnants of adrenaline from the evening. The headlights of my car pierced the darkness, revealing the occasional deer crossing the road and the looming trees standing like sentinels on either side. The rhythmic hum of my tires on the asphalt was soothing, lulling me into a trance-like state. That's when I first noticed a flicker of movement in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I glanced back but saw nothing. The road was empty behind me, just the shadowy outline of the trees. I shrugged it off, convincing myself that it was the fatigue creeping in. But then, a few minutes later, I spotted it again. A figure emerged from the woods, standing at the edge of the road. It was tall and thin, cloaked in darkness. I squinted, trying to make out more details, but the figure melted back into the shadows before I could get a good look. My heart raced, and I pressed down on the accelerator, eager to put distance between myself and whatever that was. As I continued driving, the unsettling feeling grew stronger. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon me. The woods felt alive in a way that was almost oppressive. A chill ran down my spine, and I glanced at my phone to check the time. It was well past midnight, and the battery was almost dead. I cursed under my breath, knowing that I had to find a place to recharge it soon. Suddenly, my headlights caught something in the road ahead. A large shape loomed in the middle of the asphalt. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, and skidded to a stop just in time. It was a massive tree that had fallen, its branches twisted and gnarled. I could hardly see past the tree, and my first instinct was to back up and find a different route. But as I shifted into reverse, I caught sight of something moving in the woods again. My blood ran cold as I squinted into the darkness. It was the figure from before, but this time it was closer. I could make out its pale skin glinting in the moonlight, its limbs unnaturally long. It stood completely still, watching me. I felt a wave of panic surge through me. I slammed the car into park, heart racing, and looked around for a way out. The trees felt like they were closing in, the shadows stretching and dancing in a way that made me feel trapped. Just then, my headlights flickered and went out, plunging the area into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, cursing my luck. With the screen glowing dimly, I tried to collect my thoughts. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a primal instinct telling me to run. But where could I go? I was surrounded by woods with no cell signal and no way to call for help. I glanced out the window, my breath hitching in my throat. The figure was gone, but I could feel it lurking just beyond the trees. With no other choice, I decided to leave the car. I opened the door slowly, the creaking sound seeming to echo in the stillness. I stepped out onto the gravel road, the cool air biting at my skin. I turned to look at my car, wondering if I should just stay inside. But I had to find help, and I could no longer shake the feeling that whatever was watching me wouldn't let me go without a fight. I began to walk toward the direction I had come from, scanning the shadows for any sign of life. As I walked, the trees began to whisper, the leaves rustling in a way that made my skin crawl. I felt like I was being pulled in every direction at once, and certainty gnawing at my mind. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind me, soft but distinct against the gravel. I froze, heart racing, and turned to look. Nothing was there. I glanced around, straining to listen. The woods were eerily quiet, and then I heard it again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, closer this time. I turned to run, adrenaline pumping through my veins, but the shadows seemed to twist and shift, blocking my path. My breath came in ragged gasps as I sprinted through the darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of my phone screen. In my panic, I lost track of time and direction. I stumbled through the underbrush, branches scraping my skin and thorns tearing at my clothes. I felt the breath of something cold on the back of my neck, and that was when I dared to look back. The figure stood there, closer than before, its eyes glowing like embers in the dark. It was impossibly tall, its limbs bending at unnatural angles as it moved toward me with an almost gliding motion. I turned back to my front and sprinted faster than I ever thought possible, my lungs burning as I ran through the dense forest. Just when I thought I might collapse, I saw a flicker of light in the distance. A cabin, some kind of refuge, was nestled among the trees. I darted toward it, my heart pounding. I pounded on the door, yelling for help, the sound echoing in the stillness of the night. The door creaked open slowly, revealing an elderly woman with wild hair and piercing eyes. I barely had a chance to explain before she pulled me inside, slamming the door shut behind me. "What did you see?" she asked, urgency in her voice. I could barely catch my breath as I tried to explain. I was driving, and there was something in the woods. It chased me, and she cut me off, her expression grave. "You shouldn't have come here." Panic surged within me. "Why?" "The woods are cursed," she whispered, glancing nervously toward the window. "It feeds on fear." Suddenly, the cabin shook as something pounded on the door. I stumbled backward, terrified, but the woman stood her ground. "Stay calm," she instructed, her voice steady. "It can sense your fear." The pounding grew more intense, the door rattling in its frame. I could hear the thing outside, its breath ragged and unnatural. "We can't let it in," the woman said. "You must face it." I was paralyzed with fear, my legs refusing to move. But as the door splintered, I felt a surge of determination. I needed to fight back, not just for myself, but for the woman who had saved me. With a sudden burst of courage, I grabbed a nearby chair and hurled it toward the door just as it burst open. The figure lunged into the room, and I could finally see it clearly. Its face was a grotesque mockery of humanity, twisted and contorted, its eyes filled with an insatiable hunger. I picked up a heavy lamp and swung it at the creature, feeling a surge of adrenaline as it connected. The creature howled, staggering back, and I seized the moment to run for the door. The woman shouted after me, but I couldn't stop. I burst out into the woods again, this time with a newfound determination. I ran through the trees, the light of the cabin fading behind me. I could hear the creature roaring in frustration, but I pushed myself harder, sprinting toward the road. Finally, I broke through the trees and stumbled onto the road. My car was still parked there, and I ran to it, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. I jumped inside and locked the doors, starting the engine with trembling fingers. I glanced in the rearview mirror just in time to see the figure emerge from the woods, standing at the edge of the tree line. But this time, something was different. It wasn't just a figure. It was a multitude of shadows, all staring back at me with hungry eyes. I slammed the car into gear and peeled away from that cursed place, the echoes of laughter and screams fading into the distance. Years later, I still feel the weight of that night, the way the shadows seemed to twist and warp. I never went back to that road, and I never took another late-night drive through the woods. But sometimes, when the night is quiet and the moon is full, I can still feel those eyes on me. I can still hear their whispers, telling me I will return. The night was darker than I expected as I drove down the desolate road. I had taken this route many times before, but something felt different tonight. The moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows through the trees lining the highway. With the radio tuned to a low hum and the rhythmic sound of the tires on the pavement, I tried to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. It was late, and I was exhausted after a long day at work, but I wanted to make it home. I had no intention of stopping for anything, especially not on this isolated stretch of road where no signs of life could be seen. Just me and the glow of my headlights cutting through the darkness. As I drove, the scenery shifted. The trees thickened on either side, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. I glanced at the rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of something movement in the shadows behind me. I shook it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. Then, just as I was beginning to relax, I saw something up ahead. A figure standing in the middle of the road. My heart dropped. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a stop just in time. The figure was a woman, dressed in a long, tattered white dress, her hair hanging in tangled knots around her face. She seemed to be staring right at me, and a chill ran through me. I knew I should drive away, but something kept me there, frozen in place. I leaned closer to the windshield, squinting at her, trying to understand what she was doing out here in the middle of nowhere. Just as I was about to roll down my window and ask if she needed help, she took a step closer. I felt a sudden gust of wind whip through the car, carrying an unsettling sense of dread with it. Without warning, she turned and ran off into the trees, disappearing into the thick darkness. My heart raced, and I considered leaving right then and there, but curiosity gnawed at me. I got out of the car and called after her. "Hello, are you okay?" No response came, only the rustling of leaves in the wind. I took a tentative step toward the tree line, peering into the darkness. I could feel the cold air creeping in around me, sending shivers down my spine. Then I heard it. A faint sound, like a child's laughter echoing through the woods. I turned around, my pulse racing, and glanced back at my car. It sat there, ominously still, the headlights casting long shadows. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of fear that was settling over me. Deciding I had pushed my luck far enough, I climbed back into the car, locking the doors and taking a deep breath to steady myself. Just as I was about to turn the key in the ignition, I noticed something strange in the passenger seat. A small, dusty doll, its porcelain face cracked and lifeless. I hadn't brought it with me. Panic surged through me as I fumbled to push the doll away, but the moment I touched it, the laughter returned, louder this time, as if the woods were alive with it. I threw the car into gear and sped down the road, heart racing, adrenaline pumping. I glanced at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the woman chasing after me, but the road was empty behind me. Just as I thought I was in the clear, the laughter morphed into a shrill scream. It pierced through the stillness of the night and sent ice running through my veins. I felt the car shudder as if something had struck it from behind. My hands gripped the steering wheel, and I forced myself to focus on the road ahead. The headlights flickered ominously, and I swore I saw shadows darting in the periphery. I pushed the pedal down harder, trying to escape the nightmarish reality that seemed to close in on me. Suddenly, the road ahead seemed to twist, the trees looming closer as if trying to block my escape. In the chaos, I glanced at the rearview mirror again and saw her, the woman in white. She was running alongside my car, her hair flying wildly in the wind, her mouth open in a silent scream. I screamed as I swerved to avoid a large rock in the road, narrowly missing it. I could feel panic clawing at my throat as I tore down the road, the laughter echoing in my ears. Then I saw a sharp turn in the road. I had to make it. I gripped the steering wheel tightly and turned, the tires screeching in protest. As I rounded the corner, the headlights illuminated a clearing. But instead of relief, I was met with horror. Dozens of dolls hung from the trees, their lifeless eyes staring down at me. Some were missing limbs, others were cracked, but all were covered in dirt and grime. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt, heart racing. My breath came in shallow gasps as I took in the scene before me. The dolls swayed gently in the breeze, the laughter morphing into soft whispers that filled the air. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned the key in the ignition, desperate to escape this nightmare. But the engine sputtered and died. I tried again, but it was no use. The car wouldn't start. Panic gripped me as I pounded on the steering wheel, tears staining my eyes. Just then, I heard a tapping on the window. I turned, my heart racing, and there she was, the woman in white. But she was different now. Her eyes were hollow, her face twisted into a grotesque smile. I could feel her breath against the glass, cold and clammy, "Help me," she whispered, her voice now a chilling hiss. I pressed back against my seat, terror flooding through me. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I could feel the weight of her gaze boring into me, drawing me in. Suddenly, the laughter erupted again, louder than before, reverberating through the car. I threw open the door, ready to escape, but the moment I stepped out, the world twisted. The clearing was gone, replaced by the trees, the dolls, and the shadows closing in around me. In that instant, I realized the truth. The woman, the dolls, the laughter, it was all a trap, a game that I had unknowingly stepped into. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around me like chains, and I stumbled back toward my car, desperate to escape. But when I turned around, it was gone, vanished into thin air. Leaving me alone in the dark, the laughter faded to silence, and I was left standing in the shadows, surrounded by the hollow eyes of the dolls. And that's when I knew. This road, this place, was never meant to let anyone go. I was trapped, forever caught in the horror of that night.